The eviction notice trembled in Hannah Miller's hand as she stood in the empty living room, watching her 3 children sleep on a bare mattress in the corner. Ethan, barely 2 years old, curled between his twin sisters Sophie and Grace, their small bodies pressed together for warmth. In 12 hours the locks would change, no family to call, no savings left, just cardboard boxes stacked against peeling walls and a dead husband's name that meant nothing to anyone. She turned toward the sleeping faces, her chest tightening with a mother's desperate resolve. Tomorrow she would walk into the most prestigious hotel in town, not to stay, but to beg for work. What she didn't know was that the man behind the mahogany desk would recognize a ghost in her words, and that single name would unravel secrets buried deeper than grief itself. If you're watching this story unfold, please subscribe to our channel so we can reach 1,000 subscribers and continue bringing you powerful, emotional stories like Hannah's. Your support means everything. The morning light filtered through thin curtains, casting pale shadows across the worn wooden floor. Hannah Miller moved through the small house like a ghost, her feet remembering every creak in the floorboards, every stain on the carpet where her children had played. She folded tiny clothes into a battered suitcase, her hands moving mechanically while her mind fought to stay present. Sophie appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mama, where are we going?" Hannah forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're going on an adventure, sweetheart, just for a little while." Grace joined her sister, the twins moving in that synchronized way they always had. "Is Daddy coming back from heaven for the adventure?" The question pierced through Hannah's carefully constructed composure. 2 years. 2 years since Daniel's body had been found at the construction site. 2 years since the world had collapsed beneath her feet. The official report said equipment failure. The company said they were sorry. Sorry didn't pay for funerals. Sorry didn't feed children. "No, baby. But we're going to be brave, just like Daddy would want." Hannah knelt down, pulling both girls close, breathing in the scent of their strawberry shampoo. Behind them, Ethan toddled into the room, dragging his stuffed elephant across the floor. The knock on the door came at exactly 9 o'clock. Hannah didn't need to answer it. She knew what waited on the other side, a landlord with legal papers and a sheriff ready to enforce them. She gathered the last of their belongings, herding the children toward the door with a brightness in her voice that felt like shattered glass in her throat. The street looked different in daylight, harsher somehow. Hannah loaded the children into the old station wagon Daniel had bought when the twins were born. The engine coughed twice before turning over, and she whispered a silent prayer to machinery and mercy. They drove past familiar landmarks, the park where Daniel had taught Sophie to swing, the ice cream shop where Grace had lost her first tooth, the intersection where everything had ended. She pulled into the parking lot of the Riverside Hotel just after 10. The building rose before them like a fortress of polished stone and gleaming windows, its reputation built on generations of prestige and service. Hannah had cleaned houses, waited tables, worked night shifts at the grocery store, anything to keep the bills from drowning them completely. But debt had teeth, and it had finally caught up. "Stay here," she told the children, locking the doors and cracking the windows. "I'll be right back. Sophie, you're in charge." The 5-year-old nodded solemnly, already wrapping her arms around her younger siblings. The hotel lobby stole Hannah's breath. Crystal chandeliers caught the light and scattered it across marble floors. Guests moved through the space with the casual confidence of people who belonged. Hannah felt her clothes, a worn cardigan over a faded dress, like weights pulling her down. She approached the front desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I need to speak with someone about employment," she said to the young woman behind the counter. The receptionist's polite smile flickered. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but Hannah's voice cracked. She steadied herself. "I'm willing to work any position. Housekeeping, kitchen staff, anything. I'm a hard worker, and I'm desperate." Something in her tone must have registered. The receptionist's expression softened slightly. "Wait here." Minutes stretched like hours. Hannah watched guests come and go, each one carrying themselves with an ease she couldn't remember ever feeling. Her hands twisted the strap of her purse until her knuckles went white. "Mrs. Miller?" She turned to find a tall man in an impeccable charcoal suit standing before her. His silver hair was swept back from a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so carefully controlled. Everything about him radiated authority and old money, the kind of person Daniel had taught her to be wary of, though he'd never explained why. "I'm Robert Whitmore. I own this hotel." His voice was smooth, measured. "I understand you're seeking employment." Hannah nodded, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "Yes, sir, I'll do any work you have. I'm reliable, I learn quickly, and I need this opportunity." "Do you have experience in hospitality?" "I've worked in service before, restaurants, cleaning, customer service. I'm not afraid of hard work." Robert's gaze swept over her, assessing. "Why this hotel specifically?" "Because it's known for being fair, for employing local people and treating them well." The words came out in a rush. "I have 3 children to support. I'm recently widowed and I need stability." "Your husband's name?" The question seemed oddly specific, but Hannah answered without thinking. "Daniel. Daniel Whitmore." The change in Robert's face was so subtle that most people would have missed it, a microscopic tightening around his eyes, a barely perceptible pause in his breathing. The elegant mask slipped for just a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. "I see." His voice had gone completely flat. "When can you start?" Hannah blinked, stunned by the sudden shift. Immediately. Today, if you need me." "Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock. Report to housekeeping. The manager will assign your duties." He turned to leave, then paused. "Do you have housing?" The question hung in the air between them. Hannah's throat tightened. "We're in transition." Robert's jaw worked silently. "There are staff quarters on the 3rd floor. Small rooms, but functional. You may use one temporarily while you get settled." He didn't wait for her response, didn't acknowledge her shocked gratitude. He simply walked away, his shoulders rigid beneath the expensive fabric of his suit. Hannah stood frozen in the lobby, her mind spinning. She'd expected rejection, maybe pity at best. Instead, she'd been hired on the spot and offered housing. Something about the interaction felt wrong, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. Outside, the children waited in the car. Through the window, she could see Sophie making funny faces to keep Ethan entertained. Her heart swelled and broke simultaneously. So much innocence, so much trust that their mother could fix everything. She walked back to the car on unsteady legs, her mind replaying the moment Robert Whitmore's face had changed. The way he'd said, "I see," when she mentioned Daniel's name. The way he'd offered help too quickly, as if driven by something other than kindness. Back in his office, Robert Whitmore closed the door and pressed his back against it. His hands shook as he loosened his tie. On his desk sat a photograph he kept face down, a young man with bright eyes and an infectious smile. A son who had chosen love over legacy, a son he had disowned, a son named Daniel Whitmore. Sad, what secrets did Robert bury with his son, and why did the mention of Daniel's name shatter his carefully controlled world? Subscribe and stay with us to uncover the truth. Hannah's hands trembled as she unlocked the staff quarters door. The room was small, barely large enough for 2 twin beds pushed against opposite walls, but it had clean sheets, working heat, and a lock that clicked with reassuring finality. After months of uncertainty, that simple sound felt like salvation. Sophie and Grace explored every corner with wide eyes, running their fingers along the wallpaper, testing the mattresses with experimental bounces. Ethan clung to Hannah's leg, his elephant dragging across the worn carpet. Through the narrow window, the city sprawled below them, indifferent to their small victory. "Is this ours now, Mama?" Grace asked, pressing her face against the glass. "For now, baby. For now." Hannah set down their bags and began the familiar ritual of unpacking, creating home from whatever space they occupied, transforming temporary into something that felt like belonging. That night, she lay awake, listening to her children breathe in the darkness. The hotel hummed around them with muffled sounds, footsteps in distant hallways, elevator doors opening and closing, the whisper of lives intersecting without touching. She thought about Robert Whitmore's face when she'd spoken Daniel's name, the way color had drained from his cheeks, the mechanical efficiency with which he'd offered her employment and housing, as if checking boxes on some invisible list of obligations. Daniel had never spoken about his family. In 5 years of marriage, he'd deflected every question with the same gentle firmness. "They're not part of our story anymore." She'd assumed he was an orphan, or estranged from people who didn't matter. Now lying in a room provided by a man who shared her dead husband's surname, she wondered what other truths Daniel had buried. Morning came too quickly. Hannah dressed in the dark, kissed her sleeping children, and left Sophie in charge with strict instructions not to open the door for anyone. The housekeeping manager, a stern woman named Patricia, handed her a uniform, a supply cart, and a list of rooms without preamble. Start on the 5th floor. Work your way down. Standards are high here. Mr. Whitmore doesn't tolerate sloppy work. Patricia's eyes swept over Hannah with professional assessment. You're assigned to the East Wing. Guest turnover is lower there, but the rooms are larger. Can you handle it? Yes, ma'am. The work was exhausting but familiar. Hannah moved through rooms with practiced efficiency, changing linens, scrubbing bathrooms, erasing evidence of temporary lives. Her mind found rhythm in repetition, and for brief moments she could almost forget the precariousness of their situation. It was during her lunch break, 15 minutes stolen in a service corridor, that she first noticed the pattern. Patricia appeared with revised schedules, shifting Hannah's hours to end at 3 o'clock instead of 6. Mr. Whitmore's orders, she said curtly. Something about accommodating your children. Hannah's co-worker, an older woman named Margaret, raised her eyebrows. In 20 years I've never seen him adjust anyone's schedule. You must have made quite an impression. I don't understand it either, Hannah admitted. Don't question good fortune, Margaret advised, but her tone carried a warning. Just don't expect it to last. Men like Robert Whitmore don't do favors without reason. The words followed Hannah through the afternoon. When her shift ended, she returned to find a bag outside their door. Groceries, basic supplies, children's books, no note. No explanation, just necessities appearing as if summoned by invisible hands. Sophie held up a coloring book with delight. Look, Mama, someone gave us presents. Hannah's stomach churned with gratitude and unease. She asked other staff members, but no one claimed responsibility. The gifts simply were like everything else Robert Whitmore provided, efficient, impersonal, slightly unsettling. Days blurred into weeks. Hannah worked, cared for her children, and tried to ignore the feeling of being watched. She'd catch glimpses of Robert in hallways, always distant, never approaching. But his presence lingered in the adjustments to her schedule, the extra supplies that appeared, the way other staff members treated her with cautious respect. He's protecting you, Margaret said one afternoon, her voice low. I've seen it before, though never this obvious. Someone he cares about. He doesn't know me. Maybe not you. Margaret's gaze was knowing, but he knew someone. The words crystallized something Hannah had been trying to ignore. She thought about Daniel's reluctance to discuss his past, the way he'd flinch when expensive cars drove by, how he'd taught their daughters to be wary of people with too much power, pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, Hannah found herself cleaning the administrative wing, territory usually reserved for senior staff. She moved through the corridor methodically, her cart squeaking against polished floors. The walls were lined with photographs, a visual history of the hotel's legacy. Founders, managers, distinguished guests. She almost missed it. Would have, if not for the way afternoon light caught the glass frame at just the right angle. A photograph from 15 years ago, a ribbon-cutting ceremony, champagne glasses raised, smiles frozen in time. And there, standing beside a younger Robert Whitmore, was Daniel. Hannah's cart clattered against the wall. She moved closer, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. Daniel looked barely 20, wearing a suit that fit too well to be borrowed. His smile was the same, the one she'd fallen in love with, but his posture was different, confident, entitled, belonging. The caption beneath the photo read, Robert Whitmore and son Daniel at the Riverside Hotel's 50th anniversary celebration. The world tilted. Hannah gripped the wall for support, her mind racing through every conversation, every careful omission, every time Daniel had changed the subject when she'd asked about his family. The small house they'd rented, the construction job that had killed him, the debts that had buried them. Her husband hadn't been estranged from wealth. He'd been disowned by it. You shouldn't be in this corridor. Hannah spun to find Robert Whitmore standing 10 feet away, his face carved from stone, but his eyes, those cold, controlled eyes, were fixed on the photograph with an expression that looked like drowning. "That's Daniel," Hannah whispered. "That's my husband." "I know who he is." Robert's voice was barely audible. "You knew. When I told you his name, you knew exactly who I was talking about." Anger cut through Hannah's shock, sharp and clarifying. "You're his father." The word hung between them like an accusation. Robert's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it, didn't explain. Just stood there, looking at the photograph of a son he'd erased from his life. "Why did you hire me?" Hannah demanded. "Why are you helping us?" "Because I failed him." The words came out raw, stripped of the elegant control Robert usually wore like armor. "And I won't fail his children." Before Hannah could respond, Robert turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. She stood alone with the photograph, staring at her husband's young face, understanding finally clicking into place like a lock turning. Daniel Whitmore had been an heir, and she had been the reason he'd lost everything. Back in his office, Robert closed the door and leaned against his desk, his breath coming in short gasps. He pulled open the bottom drawer, the one he never showed anyone, and removed a stack of letters bound with string. Letters Daniel had sent over the years, letters begging for reconciliation, letters announcing his marriage, letters asking for help, letters Robert had never answered. The last one was dated 3 months before Daniel's death. "Dad, I'm sick. The doctors say it's treatable, but I can't afford the medication and work at the same time. I know you said never to contact you again, but I have a family now, 3 children. Please, I'm not asking for me. I'm asking for them." Robert had burned that letter, told himself his son had made his choice. Now, looking at the ashes of his pride, he understood exactly what his silence had cost. The truth is finally surfacing, but the full weight of Robert's choices has yet to be revealed. What really happened between father and son? Hannah couldn't sleep. The photograph haunted her. Daniel's young face, the expensive suit, the casual way he'd stood beside his father, as if privilege was something he'd been born into. She thought about their wedding, held in a courthouse with 2 strangers as witnesses. Daniel had said his family was gone, not estranged, not distant. Gone. He'd lied to protect her. Or maybe to protect himself from the shame of what he'd lost. Morning brought a knock on the door. Hannah opened it to find Patricia holding an envelope. "Mr. Whitmore asked me to give you this." Inside was a key and a note in precise handwriting. "3rd floor, room 304. More space for the children. Move whenever you're ready." Hannah climbed the stairs with growing confusion. Room 304 wasn't in the staff quarters. It was in the family suites, the section reserved for long-term guests and visiting executives. She unlocked the door and stepped into a space 3 times larger than their current room. 2 bedrooms, a small living area, a kitchenette, windows that actually let in light. Sophie and Grace squealed with delight when they saw it, racing between rooms and claiming beds. Ethan toddled after them, his laughter echoing off walls that didn't feel like they were closing in. Hannah stood in the center of it all, her chest tight with emotions she couldn't name. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered to the empty air. Before we go further into Hannah's story, we want to thank you for being here. If you're finding this journey as compelling as we do, please hit that subscribe button. Reaching 1,000 subscribers helps us bring more powerful stories like this one to life. Your support truly matters. The whispers started within days. Hannah felt them like static electricity as she pushed her cleaning cart through hallways. Staff members who'd barely acknowledged her before now watched with naked curiosity. In the break room, conversation stopped when she entered. Margaret finally pulled her aside during lunch. "People are talking. They want to know why you're getting special treatment." "I don't know why either," Hannah said honestly. "The suite, the schedule adjustments, the way Mr. Whitmore looks at your children when he thinks no one's watching." Margaret's expression was kind but serious. "He comes to the 3rd floor, Hannah, twice a day. Stands in the hallway near your door. Never knocks. Just stands there for a few minutes, then leaves." Hannah's skin prickled. "That's not normal." Nothing about this is normal. In 20 years, I've never seen Robert Whitmore show interest in an employee's personal life. He's professional to the point of coldness. But with you, Margaret shook her head, it's like he's trying to make up for something. That afternoon, Hannah watched. Sure enough, at precisely 3:30, she heard footsteps pause outside their door. Through the peephole, she saw Robert standing motionless in the hallway. His face was unreadable, but his hands were clenched at his sides. After exactly 3 minutes, he walked away. The next day, she positioned herself to intercept him. "Mr. Whitmore, we need to talk." He stopped but didn't turn around. "About what, Mrs. Miller?" "About why you're doing this. The suite, the benefits, the—" She gestured vaguely. "Everything. I deserve to know why. You're a good employee. I take care of my staff. You don't do this for other employees." Hannah stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You stand outside my door watching my children. You've given us accommodations that don't match my position. Either tell me the truth or I'll find somewhere else to work." Robert finally turned to face her. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. "Those children are my grandchildren. I'm trying to—" His voice cracked slightly. "I'm trying to do what I should have done years ago. By hiding in hallways, by giving us things without explanation." Hannah's anger surprised her with its intensity. "Daniel is dead. You can't fix that with a nicer room." "I know." The words were barely audible. "But I can keep you safe. I can make sure they have opportunities. You can tell me the truth about what happened between you and Daniel." Robert's composure finally cracked. "Not here, not now." But Hannah was done accepting non-answers. Over the following days, she began asking questions. She talked to longtime staff members, pieced together fragments of hotel gossip, learned about the son who'd disappeared from family photographs overnight. An older maintenance worker named Thomas had known Daniel. Smart kid, kind, always treated us like people, not servants. He polished a brass railing thoughtfully. Then one day, maybe 7 years ago, everything changed. Robert called a staff meeting, told us Daniel was no longer part of the family. Anyone caught helping him would be fired. Just like that, the boy was erased. "Why?" Hannah asked. Thomas shrugged. No one knew for sure. But there were rumors he'd married someone Robert didn't approve of, someone without money or status. He gave Hannah a meaningful look. Someone who didn't fit into this world. The pieces assembled themselves into a portrait of class prejudice and wounded pride. Daniel had chosen love over legacy, and his father had chosen power over his son. The weight of it pressed against Hannah's chest like a stone. She found herself studying the twins, looking for traces of their grandfather in their faces. Sophie had his determined chin. Grace had inherited something in the set of her eyes. Even Ethan, with his toddler clumsiness, moved with a certain confidence that seemed bred into his bones. One evening, as Hannah tucked the girls into bed, Sophie asked, "Mama, why does that man watch us?" Hannah's blood went cold. "What man, sweetheart?" "The one in the nice suits. He stands by the door sometimes when we play in the hallway. He doesn't say anything, he just looks sad." Hannah forced her voice to remain calm. "What does he look like?" "Old," Grace supplied, "with silver hair. He looks like the picture of Daddy you keep in your purse, the one from before we were born." After the girls fell asleep, Hannah stood in the hallway where Robert conducted his silent vigils. She tried to imagine what he saw, the grandchildren he'd never met, living proof of the son he'd rejected. Did he see Daniel in their faces? Did the resemblance cut him the way it must cut her every morning? The next afternoon, she found an envelope slipped under their door. Inside was a photograph, Daniel at 8 years old, standing in front of the hotel with a gap-toothed smile. On the back, someone had written in shaky handwriting, "He loved this place. He would have been a better man than me." Hannah traced her finger over Daniel's young face. She thought about the husband she'd known, gentle, hard-working, fiercely protective of his small family. He'd never complained about their modest life, never expressed regret for what he'd given up. But sometimes late at night, she'd catch him staring at nothing with an expression of profound loss. She'd asked him once what he was thinking about. "Just wondering what kind of man I might have been," he'd said, if I'd been braver when it mattered. Now she understood. Daniel hadn't lost his courage. He'd found it. He'd chosen authenticity over approval, love over luxury, and it had killed him. Not directly, but through the slow erosion of denied medical care, accumulating debt, and the physical toll of work his body couldn't sustain. Hannah walked to Robert's office without overthinking it. His secretary tried to stop her, but she pushed past and opened the door without knocking. Robert looked up from his desk, startled. "Mrs. Miller, I found your photograph, the one of Daniel as a child." Hannah's voice shook but held steady. "You want to be part of their lives? Then stop hiding in hallways. Stop sending gifts without context. Either be their grandfather or leave us alone. These children deserve better than a ghost." Robert's face had gone pale. "I don't know how to be what they need." "Neither do I," Hannah admitted. "I'm making it up as I go, praying I don't break them worse than they're already broken. But I show up. Every single day, I show up." She moved closer to his desk. "You took something from Daniel, from us. You can't give it back, but you can decide what happens next." The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of mistakes and missed chances. Finally, Robert spoke. "I need you to understand why I did what I did. What really happened. It won't excuse it, but you deserve the full truth." Hannah pulled out a chair and sat down. "Then tell me. Tell me everything." Robert's hands trembled as he opened that bottom drawer again, pulling out the stack of letters. "It started 7 years ago when Daniel told me he was in love. The walls are finally coming down, and the painful truth is about to emerge. What drove Robert to cut off his own son? And can Hannah ever forgive the man whose pride destroyed her family?" Robert's office felt smaller than it had moments before, as if the walls were contracting around the truth that was finally being spoken. He placed the stack of letters on the desk between them, his fingers lingering on the worn string that bound them together. "Daniel came to me 7 years ago," Robert began, his voice stripped of its usual authority. "He was 25. Brilliant. Being groomed to take over the hotel? Everything I'd built was supposed to be his." He paused, his jaw working silently. "Then he told me he'd met someone, a waitress at a diner downtown. He said he was in love." Hannah's hands clenched in her lap. She remembered that diner, the cracked vinyl booths, the coffee that was always slightly burnt. She'd worked double shifts to save for community college classes she'd never finished. "I told him it was a phase, that he needed to focus on his future, on his responsibilities." Robert's eyes were distant, locked on some invisible point in the past. "He said you made him happy, that you saw him as a person, not as an heir. I called it naive, reckless." "You called me trash," Hannah said quietly. The words had lived in her imagination for so long that speaking them aloud felt like exorcising a ghost. "That's what he told me eventually, that his father said I was beneath him." Robert flinched as if struck. "I said things I can never take back, things I told myself were for his own good." He pulled one letter from the stack, unfolding it with shaking hands. "This was the first one he sent, after I cut him off, 3 months after your courthouse wedding." He slid it across the desk. Hannah picked it up, recognizing Daniel's careful handwriting immediately. "Dad, I know you're angry. I know I disappointed you. But Hannah is pregnant with twins. I'm asking you, not for money, not for the business, just to meet her, to give her a chance. She's brilliant and kind, and she loves me not because of what I have, but despite what I've lost. Please, I'm your son. Don't let pride destroy what we could still have." Hannah's vision blurred. She remembered being pregnant, terrified and hopeful, while Daniel made phone calls that were never returned. He'd told her his father needed time. She'd believed him because the alternative was too painful. "I threw that letter away," Robert continued, "told myself he'd made his choice, that if I stayed firm he'd come to his senses and realize the mistake he'd made." His voice cracked. "I was so certain I was protecting him, protecting the family legacy. I couldn't see that I was destroying both." Hannah looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "He worked himself to death trying to provide for us. Construction jobs, night shifts, anything that paid. He never complained, never said he regretted choosing me. Her voice rose with anger, born of grief, but his body couldn't handle it. The injuries, the exhaustion. He got sick. Robert's interruption was barely a whisper. I know. He wrote to me. He pulled out another letter, newer, the paper still crisp. Hannah took it with trembling hands, her heart already breaking before she read the first line. Dad, I'm sick. The doctors say it's treatable, but I can't afford the medication and work at the same time. I'm not writing to ask for money for me. I've accepted that bridge is burned, but I have 3 children now. Ethan just turned 1. If something happens to me, Hannah will be alone with 3 kids and no support. I'm begging you, not as your son, as their grandfather. Please don't let your pride hurt them the way it's hurt me. The date on the letter was 3 months before Daniel's accident. 3 months during which treatment could have saved him. 3 months when one phone call, one check, one moment of mercy could have changed everything. Hannah's hands shook so violently the letter fell to the desk. You let him die. I didn't think. Robert's face had gone grey. I told myself it was manipulation, that he was exaggerating to get money. I burned the letter. His voice broke completely. I murdered my son through silence. The weight of those words filled the office like poison gas. Hannah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need to leave. Wait. Robert's voice was desperate. Please, let me explain. Explain what? Hannah's anger exploded, raw and justified, that you were too proud to save your own son, that your precious legacy was more important than his life, than my children having a father. She moved toward the door, then turned back. You know what the worst part is? Daniel loved you. Even after everything, he still talked about you like you were someone worth respecting. He protected your memory to me and the children, never told us the full truth because he didn't want us to hate you the way you hated me. Robert stood, reaching out as if to physically hold her there. I didn't hate you. I didn't even know you. That's the terrible truth. I destroyed my son's life over someone I'd never met because of principles I told myself were important. What principles? Hannah demanded. That poor people don't deserve dignity. That love is less important than business. That your comfort mattered more than your son's survival. I was wrong. The words came out broken. About everything. And I've spent 2 years drowning in that knowledge, wondering how I became the kind of man who could turn his back on his own child. Hannah wiped her eyes roughly. You want absolution? Forgiveness? I can't give you that. Daniel's gone because of choices you made. My children grew up without a father because your ego was more important than his life. She walked to the door, her hand on the handle, before Robert's next words stopped her cold. I know what you think of me. I know what I am. But those children, his voice broke again, they're all I have left of him. And I will spend whatever time I have left trying to be worthy of their existence, even if I can never make up for what I took from them. Hannah looked back at him, this broken man surrounded by his expensive furniture and hollow achievements. You took their father. You took the only person who ever loved me unconditionally. You took 5 years that we'll never get back. Years Daniel could have lived if you'd answered one letter, made one phone call, been even a fraction of the man your son was. She left him there, alone with his letters and his guilt. The walk back to their suite felt endless. Her legs moved automatically, while her mind replayed every moment of Daniel's slow decline, the way he'd waved off her concerns about his coughing, the nights he'd come home too exhausted to eat, the morning she'd found him collapsed in the bathroom, and he'd sworn it was just dehydration. He'd been dying and she hadn't known. He'd been begging his father for help, and she hadn't known that either. All those nights she'd wondered why he seemed so sad, why he'd hold her like someone trying to memorize the feeling of being loved. Now she understood. He'd been fighting a battle on every front, trying to provide and survive and protect them all, while his body betrayed him one cell at a time. Inside the suite, the children were playing a game with building blocks. Sophie had constructed an elaborate tower, while Grace arranged smaller blocks around it like a fortress. Ethan knocked them over periodically, delighted with the chaos he could create. "Mama, look!" Sophie called out. "I built the hotel!" Hannah knelt beside them, pulling all 3 children close. She breathed in their familiar scent, shampoo and innocence, and the particular sweetness of childhood. These were Daniel's legacy, not the hotel, not the money, not the Whitmore name. These three beautiful, resilient souls who'd survived despite everything. That night, after the children were asleep, Hannah sat by the window staring out at the city. She thought about Robert's face when he'd admitted his role in Daniel's death, about the letters her husband had written, begging for a mercy that never came, about the medication that could have saved him, sitting in some pharmacy unreachable behind the wall of its price tag. She thought about class and pride, and the way money could insulate people from the consequences of their cruelty. Robert Whitmore had made a choice, to value his principles over his son's life, and that choice had created a cascade of loss that echoed through years, touching everyone it reached. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Margaret standing in the hallway, her face concerned. "I heard what happened," Margaret said quietly. "The whole staff is talking about the shouting from Mr. Whitmore's office. Are you okay?" Hannah shook her head. "I found out who he is, what he did, and I don't know if I can keep working here knowing that every dollar I earn comes from the man who killed my husband." Margaret stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." Hannah's voice was hollow. "I need this job. The children need stability. But how can I accept help from someone whose pride murdered the person I loved most in the world?" "Maybe," Margaret said carefully, "you make him face what he did. Every single day. You stay. You take what you need for those kids, and you make sure he never forgets the cost of his choices." Hannah looked at her children sleeping peacefully, unaware of the legacy of pain they'd inherited. They deserve to know their grandfather existed, that he's alive and wants to be part of their lives. She paused, her throat tight. But they also deserve to know the truth about why their father isn't here. What truth are you going to tell them? Hannah thought about Daniel's gentle smile, his patient hands teaching Sophie to read, the way he'd sung grace to sleep even when exhaustion made his voice crack. That their father was the bravest man I ever knew, that he chose love over everything and it cost him his life, and that sometimes the people who should protect us are the ones who hurt us most. The truth is finally exposed, raw and devastating. But what happens when the past can't be changed, only confronted? Will Hannah find a way to navigate this impossible situation, or will the weight of Robert's sins crush them all? 3 days passed in suffocating silence. Hannah went to work, cleaned rooms with mechanical precision, and avoided every corridor where she might encounter Robert Whitmore. At night, she lay awake constructing and dismantling plans. Leave the hotel, stay for the children, confront him again, pretend none of it had happened. Every option felt like choosing between different kinds of poison. On the 4th morning, she found an envelope under her door. Not a gift this time. A request written in Robert's careful handwriting. "Please meet me in the hotel archives, basement level. I need to show you something. No obligations, just truth." Hannah almost threw it away, but curiosity, or maybe the need to fully understand the scope of what had been taken from her, pulled her downstairs after her shift ended. She asked Margaret to watch the children, offering no explanation beyond "something I need to do." The archives were exactly what she'd expected. Rows of filing cabinets, boxes of documents, the accumulated paper memory of decades in business. Robert stood beside a table covered in photograph albums and folders, his posture defeated in a way that would have satisfied her a week ago. Now it just looked pathetic. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm not here to forgive you." Hannah's voice was ice. "I'm here because I need to understand the full picture. For my children." "I know." Robert gestured to the table. "These are Daniel's things. Everything I kept after I cut him off. I told myself I'd destroyed it all, but I couldn't. I hid it down here instead, visiting it like a shrine to my own failure." Hannah moved closer, her heart already bracing for impact. The first album contained photographs of Daniel as a child, birthday parties in the hotel ballroom, Christmas mornings surrounded by expensive toys, school achievements documented with professional precision. A childhood of privilege she'd never known existed. "He had everything," Robert said, his voice thick. Private schools, travel, opportunities most people never dream of. I thought I was preparing him to inherit something meaningful. Instead, I was building a cage. Hannah turned pages, watching Daniel age through the photographs. She could see the moment things changed. Around 16, his smile became more guarded, his posture stiffer. In earlier photos, he looked at the camera with open joy. Later, he looked past it, as if already planning his escape. "What happened when he was 16?" she asked. Robert pulled out a folder. He started questioning things, the way we treated staff, the way we selected guests, the whole structure of class and privilege we'd built the business on. He opened the folder, revealing report cards and school essays. His teachers said he was brilliant but troubled, that he cared too much about justice, about fairness. I called it naivety, told him the world didn't work on idealism. One essay caught Hannah's eye, a paper on economic inequality with furious red corrections in the margins. The teacher had written, "Passionate but impractical. Focus on what is, not what should be." At the bottom, in Daniel's teenage handwriting, "Someone has to care about what should be." Hannah's throat tightened. She recognized that righteousness, that bone-deep commitment to fairness. It was the same quality that had made Daniel split his last $20 with a homeless veteran, the same instinct that made him carry groceries for elderly neighbors even when his back was screaming in pain. "He tried to change me," Robert continued. "For years. He'd bring home friends from school, kids from different backgrounds, and I'd make excuses why they couldn't stay for dinner. He'd talk about social responsibility, and I'd lecture him about business realities. Every conversation became a battle, and I was so certain I was right." Hannah moved to the next album. These photographs were different. Candid shots, taken with a cheaper camera. Daniel in college, looking happier than she'd seen in the formal portraits. Daniel with friends of all backgrounds. Daniel volunteering at a shelter. Daniel looking like someone who'd finally found air to breathe. "He stopped bringing people home after that," Robert said. "Stopped talking to me about anything that mattered. We existed in parallel. He did his duties for the business. I pretended not to notice how much he hated it. Then one day, he came to my office and told me he'd met you." Robert pulled out a photograph that made Hannah's breath catch. It was her and Daniel, taken without their knowledge. They were sitting in the diner where they'd met, both laughing at something, his hand covering hers on the scarred Formica table. She remembered that day. He'd just told her about his childhood dog, a ridiculous story about a Dalmatian who'd eaten an entire birthday cake. Simple joy, captured and preserved by someone who'd been watching. "I had him followed," Robert admitted, shame coloring his voice. "I needed to know who you were, what you wanted from him. The investigator brought back this photo and told me you worked 2 jobs, sent money to your mother, had no criminal record, no ulterior motives. You were exactly what Daniel said you were. Kind, hard-working, and completely in love with my son." Hannah stared at her younger self, so unaware of the scrutiny she'd been under. And that wasn't enough. It should have been. God help me, it should have been everything. Robert's composure finally shattered. But I looked at this photograph and all I could see was the end of my plans, the end of the dynasty I'd built. I convinced myself that Daniel was throwing away his potential, that you were a distraction from his real life. "I was his real life," Hannah said fiercely. "Everything else was the distraction." Robert nodded, tears streaming down his face, the first emotion she'd seen from him that looked genuine. "I know that now. I knew it the day I burned his letter asking for help. I knew it. And I did nothing because my pride was a disease I'd been carrying so long I didn't know how to cure it." He pulled out one final folder, this one containing medical records. Hannah's hands shook as she opened it. Inside were diagnoses, treatment plans, bills that made her dizzy. Daniel's illness had been treatable, easily treatable with proper medication and reduced stress. The prescriptions were listed with their costs, amounts that would have been nothing to Robert Whitmore, but were impossible mountains to a construction worker with 3 children. "I got these after he died," Robert said. "I needed to know if I could have saved him. The doctors were clear. With proper treatment he would have had years, decades, but he couldn't afford the medication and feed his family. He chose you. He always chose you." Hannah closed the folder carefully, as if it might shatter. You want me to absolve you of this, to tell you it's okay because you didn't know, you couldn't have predicted. No, Robert's interruption was sharp. I don't want absolution. I want you to understand that I know exactly what I did. I murdered my son through deliberate neglect. I valued my ego more than his life, and I will carry that knowledge until the day I die. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of the building's ventilation system. Hannah looked at this man who'd had everything and destroyed it all through stubborn cruelty. She thought about Daniel's final months, the way he'd held her at night like someone drowning, the way he'd recorded video messages for the children just in case, the way he'd made her promise to tell them he'd loved them more than anything. "Why are you showing me this now?" she finally asked. "Because I want to make you an offer, and you deserve to make it with full information." Robert straightened, gathering what remained of his dignity. "I want to legally recognize Sophie, Grace, and Ethan as my grandchildren, put them in my will, give them the inheritance Daniel should have had, access to education, healthcare, security, everything I denied their father." Hannah's stomach twisted. "You want to buy my silence? Buy access to them. I want to correct a fraction of the damage I've done. I can't bring Daniel back. I can't give you the years you lost. But I can make sure his children have opportunities, that they never suffer because of money the way their father did." Robert's voice was steady now, as if he'd rehearsed this moment. "No conditions, no control over how you raise them. Just legal recognition and financial security." "And what do you get out of this?" Hannah demanded. "The knowledge that something good came from the wreckage I created, and maybe—" his voice broke again, "maybe occasional glimpses of my grandchildren. Not as their grandfather. I haven't earned that. Just as someone who exists in their orbit trying to do better." Hannah thought about Sophie's questions about new school supplies, about Grace's excitement over library books because they couldn't afford to buy any, about Ethan's shoes that were already too small, and the medical checkup she'd been postponing because the copay felt impossible. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course." Robert moved toward the door, then paused. "Hannah, may I call you Hannah?" She nodded stiffly. "Daniel's last letter to me, the one I burned, he wrote something at the end I've memorized." Robert's eyes were distant, seeing something she couldn't. He said, "I hope someday you meet Hannah and the kids. Not because I need you anymore, but because they're proof that love is real, that choosing your heart over your fear is the only thing that matters. I hope you learn that before it's too late." I learned it too late for him, but maybe not too late for them. After he left, Hannah sat alone in the archives, surrounded by the documented history of a family destroyed by pride. She opened Daniel's essay again, reading his teenage conviction that someone had to care about what should be, not just what is. She thought about her children sleeping upstairs, innocent of the inheritance war being waged around them. They had Robert's blood in their veins, whether she liked it or not. They had Daniel's gentleness and his fierce sense of justice. They deserved every opportunity, every advantage, every chance that had been denied to their father. But they also deserved to know the truth, to understand that money and power without conscience were just different forms of poverty. Margaret found her there an hour later. "The kids are asking for you." Hannah stood, gathering the photographs she'd unconsciously been clutching, Daniel laughing in the diner, young and in love and doomed. "He wants to put them in his will, make them his legal heirs." "What are you going to do?" Hannah looked at Daniel's face one more time before carefully placing the photo back in the album. "I'm going to make sure my children never forget what their father sacrificed, and I'm going to make sure his father never forgets what his pride cost. If Robert Whitmore wants to be part of their lives, he's going to have to earn it every single day, knowing he'll never be enough." She walked toward the stairs, then turned back. "And Margaret, if I take his money, it's not forgiveness, it's reparations. It's what Daniel was owed, paid to the people he loved most. Robert has laid everything bare, offering what he can never truly repay. But can financial security ever compensate for a father's absence? And will Hannah's decision bring peace or open new wounds? Hannah spent the weekend in careful deliberation, her mind weighing impossible scales. Saturday morning, she took the children to the small park, 3 blocks from the hotel. a patch of grass with rusty swings where mothers who couldn't afford country clubs brought their kids to play. Sophie pushed Ethan on the slide, while Grace collected dandelions, constructing elaborate bouquets from weeds. "Mama, why are you so quiet?" Sophie asked, her perceptiveness always startling. "Just thinking about big decisions, sweetheart." "About the sad man?" Grace added another dandelion to her collection. "The one who looks like Daddy in the old picture?" Hannah's breath caught. "What makes you think he's sad?" "His eyes," Sophie said, with the simple wisdom of children. "Like he lost something he can't find." That night, after the children slept, Hannah pulled out the box of Daniel's belongings she'd carried through every move: photographs, his wedding ring, the notebook where he'd written letters to the children for birthdays he knew he wouldn't see. She read them again, these messages from beyond death, and found her answer in his careful handwriting. "Sophie, be brave enough to question everything, including me. Grace, never apologize for your kindness. Ethan, the world will tell you what you should be. Listen to your heart instead." Monday morning she walked into Robert's office without knocking. He looked up, hope and fear warring on his face. "I'll accept your offer," Hannah said before he could speak. "But with conditions." Robert stood immediately. "Anything. The children will know everything. Not now. They're too young. But when they're old enough to understand, they'll learn exactly what happened. Why their father lived the way he did. Why you weren't in his life. Why he died." She moved closer to his desk, her voice steady and uncompromising. "They'll know that money doesn't erase cruelty and that blood doesn't automatically earn respect." "I understand. I'm not finished." Hannah's hands were clenched at her sides. "You want to be part of their lives? Then you show up, not with gifts, not with grand gestures, with presence. You learn their favorite colors. You remember their birthdays. You attend their school events. You be what you refuse to be for Daniel, someone who chooses love over pride." "I will," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "And one more thing." Hannah's eyes burned with unshed tears. "Daniel's name stays alive, not just in legal documents, not just in photographs hidden in archives. You will speak about your son. You will tell my children stories about him. You will keep his memory present, not as penance, but as honor. He deserves to exist in this family's history." Robert's composure cracked completely. "He was the best thing I ever created, and I destroyed him because I was too proud to see his value. I will spend the rest of my life making sure everyone knows what I lost." We want to pause here to thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story has touched you, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful narratives about love, loss, and redemption. Every subscriber brings us closer to our goal of 1,000. The legal paperwork took 3 weeks to complete. Hannah met with lawyers who treated her with careful respect, not because of who she was, but because of who employed them. Robert established trust funds for each child, ensured comprehensive healthcare coverage, and created college funds that would open doors Daniel had been locked out of. On paper, the children became heirs to a fortune their father had been deemed unworthy to touch. But paper was the easy part. The real work began on a Tuesday afternoon when Robert knocked on their suite door, his hands empty of gifts, his expression vulnerable in a way Hannah had never seen. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted when she opened the door. "I don't know how to be a grandfather." "Neither did Daniel know how to be a father," Hannah replied, "but he showed up every day and learned. That's all you can do." She let him in. The children looked up from their coloring books, curious but cautious. Ethan hid behind Sophie's leg. Grace clutched her crayons like weapons. "Kids," Hannah said gently, "this is Mr. Whitmore. He was your daddy's father." "Our grandpa?" Sophie asked, her voice careful. "Yes." Hannah knelt beside them. "He wants to get to know you, but only if you want that too. You're allowed to say no." The children exchanged glances in that silent communication twins perfected. Finally, Grace spoke. "Did you know our daddy?" Robert's voice was rough when he answered. "I did, when he was young, before you were born." "Mama says he was brave," Sophie added. "He was the bravest person I ever knew," Robert said, and the truth in his voice made Hannah's throat tighten. "He loved you all more than anything in the world." "Do you have pictures," Grace asked, "of when Daddy was little like us?" Robert looked at Hannah, seeking permission. She nodded once. "I do." "Would you like to see them?" That afternoon, Robert sat on their floor, this powerful man in an expensive suit sitting cross-legged on worn carpet, showing 3 children photographs of their father's childhood. He told stories carefully edited for young ears, speaking about Daniel's kindness, his laughter, his terrible singing voice that he'd passed on to Sophie. Hannah watched from the kitchen, her heart a complicated tangle of grief and possibility. This wouldn't erase what Robert had done. Nothing could. But watching him point out how Grace had Daniel's exact smile, hearing him tell Ethan about the imaginary dragon Daniel had believed lived in the hotel basement, it was something. A beginning built on ruins. The following months unfolded in careful increments. Robert appeared for supervised visits, always asking permission, never assuming access. He learned that Sophie loved books about space, that Grace collected rocks, that Ethan would only eat sandwiches cut into triangles. He made mistakes, brought toys that were too expensive, forgot that the twins had different personalities despite identical faces, called Ethan by Daniel's childhood nickname, and had to excuse himself to cry in the hallway. But he kept showing up. Hannah watched this transformation with the wary eye of someone who'd learned that people could hurt you while claiming to love you. She documented everything, not for legal reasons, but for her children's eventual understanding. Someday they'd need to know the full story, and she would give it to them with unflinching honesty. The hotel staff noticed the changes too. Robert's cold efficiency softened at the edges. He learned employees' names, asked about their families, approved raises and benefits with less resistance. Margaret told Hannah that people whispered about it, how losing his son had either broken him or finally made him human. "Maybe both," Hannah replied. 6 months after their first conversation in the archives, Robert invited them to Sunday dinner in his private quarters. Hannah almost refused. The space felt too intimate, too much like accepting him as family rather than obligation. But the children were excited, and she'd promised to let them lead when they were ready. Robert's apartment occupied the hotel's top floor, a space of wealth and loneliness. But he'd transformed the dining room for their visit. Children's books on the shelves, a box of toys in the corner, photographs of Daniel covering surfaces that had probably held expensive art. During dinner, Sophie asked the question Hannah had been dreading. "Grandpa, why didn't you come see us before, when Daddy was alive?" The room went silent. Robert set down his fork with trembling hands. Hannah started to intervene, but he held up a hand. "Because I made a terrible mistake," he said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "Your daddy wanted me to meet you and I said no. I was wrong, and I hurt him very badly. I can't fix that mistake, but I'm trying very hard to be better now." "Why did you say no?" Grace's directness was pure Daniel. Robert looked at Hannah, seeking guidance. She gave him none. These were his consequences to face. "Because I thought I knew what was important, and I was wrong about everything that mattered," he finally said. "I learned too late that love is more important than pride. Your daddy tried to teach me that, but I didn't listen." Sophie considered this with her serious expression. "Mama says Daddy was brave because he chose us even when it was hard." "Your mama is right. Your daddy was braver than I ever was." Robert's voice broke. "And I'm so sorry I didn't get to tell him that when he was alive." Ethan, who'd been quietly eating, suddenly climbed down from his chair and walked to Robert. He held up his stuffed elephant, the one that had traveled through every crisis, the one Daniel had bought at a thrift store and called the finest elephant in the land. "You can hold him," Ethan said. "When I'm sad, he helps." Robert took the worn toy with shaking hands, pulling his youngest grandson into a careful embrace. Hannah watched tears stream down his face as he held both child and elephant, this man learning grief and grace simultaneously. That night, after returning to their suite, Hannah tucked the children into bed and answered their questions about family, mistakes, and whether people could change. She spoke carefully, age-appropriately, planting seeds of truth that would grow as they did. "Is Grandpa good now?" Grace asked. "I think he's trying to be," Hannah answered honestly. Sometimes people hurt us very badly, and trying to be better doesn't erase what they did. But it's still important that they try. Mama? Sophie's voice was small. Do you think Daddy would want us to know, Grandpa? Hannah thought about Daniel's letters, his conviction that love mattered most, his gentle insistence that bitterness was a poison you drank yourself. I think your daddy would want you to make your own choice. And whatever you choose, I'll support you. The weeks became months, and slowly, impossibly, something like healing began. Robert established a scholarship at the local community college in Daniel's name, full tuition for students from working-class families. He funded a medical clinic offering free treatment for construction workers. He couldn't resurrect his son, but he could honor the values Daniel had died defending. Hannah still worked at the hotel, though Robert had offered repeatedly to support her without employment. She refused. The work gave her purpose, independence, and the satisfaction of knowing she was building her children's security with her own hands, not just inherited guilt. 1 year after that first confrontation in his office, Robert invited Hannah for coffee in the hotel restaurant. No children, no witnesses, just two people forever bound by love for someone they'd both lost. I want to show you something, he said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were architectural plans for a renovation of the hotel's east wing. A section would be converted into affordable housing units for employees and community members, quality apartments at reduced rates, with on-site childcare and healthcare services. It's called the Daniel Whitmore Memorial Housing Initiative, Robert explained. Everything he believed in, everything I was too blind to see, mattered. Hannah studied the plans, seeing her husband's values translated into concrete and steel. He would have loved this. I need to ask you something. Robert's hands were clasped tightly on the table. The children call me Grandpa now. They've started to trust me, but I need to know, have I earned that? Or am I just someone they're being polite to? Hannah considered the question carefully. You haven't earned forgiveness. I'm not sure you ever will. Daniel is still dead because of choices you made. She watched him flinch, but continued. But you're showing up. You're trying. You're letting them see your failures and your efforts to do better. That's more than most people manage. Is it enough? Enough for what? To erase the past? No. To give these children a grandfather who loves them? Maybe. Time will tell. Hannah leaned forward. But Robert, understand this. They will grow up knowing the full truth. When they're old enough, they'll learn that their father died because you valued pride over his life. How they handle that knowledge will determine whether you truly have a relationship with them or just a legal obligation. I know. His voice was quiet. I tell myself that story every morning. I will never let myself forget. 2 years passed. Sophie and Grace turned 7. Ethan started preschool. Robert attended every birthday party, every school performance, every small moment that built the architecture of childhood. He was learning to love without expectation, to give without demanding gratitude, to exist in his grandchildren's lives as someone who would always be working to deserve their presence. Hannah watched this transformation with emotions that refused to simplify. She would never forgive Robert for what he'd taken from her, but she could acknowledge what he was trying to give her children, not as replacement for their father, but as additional foundation for their future. On the 2nd anniversary of Daniel's death, they gathered at his grave. Hannah, the children, and Robert standing together in complicated grief. Sophie and Grace had made drawings to leave at the headstone. Ethan brought his elephant. Robert brought a letter. He read it aloud, his voice breaking over words that came too late but needed to be spoken anyway. Daniel, my son, I failed you in every way a father can fail. I chose pride over love, ego over compassion, and I destroyed something precious because I was too afraid to let you be yourself. You died believing I didn't love you, and that knowledge will haunt me until my last breath. But your children, his voice cracked completely, your children are magnificent. They have your kindness, your sense of justice, your terrible singing voice. They are proof that love triumphs over cruelty, that choosing your heart over fear is the only courage that matters. I'm trying to be worthy of them, though I never will be. I'm trying to be the father you deserved even though it's too late for you. I'm sorry, son. I'm so deeply, endlessly sorry. He placed the letter on the grave, weighted down with a stone Grace handed him. The five of them stood in silence, bound together by loss and the fragile possibility of redemption. Walking back to the car, Sophie slipped her hand into Robert's. "Grandpa, Daddy knows you're trying. Mama says people in heaven can see us, and they know when we're being brave." Robert looked at Hannah, tears streaming freely. She nodded once, giving him permission to take whatever comfort he could from a child's faith. That night, after the children were asleep, Hannah stood at the window of their suite, no longer temporary housing but home. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, desperate and evicted, walking into this building with nothing but hope and 3 children to feed. She thought about Daniel, forever frozen at 32, never knowing his children would grow up with opportunities he'd been denied. She thought about Robert, this broken man learning too late that wealth without conscience was poverty of the soul. He would never be enough. The money would never be enough. But maybe the trying was what mattered, showing her children that people could grow, could change, could face their failures and choose to do better. Hannah pulled out her phone and recorded a video message for her children to watch someday, when they were old enough to understand complexity, when life had taught them that people contain multitudes of good and terrible. "Your father was the best person I ever knew. He chose love over everything, and it killed him. Your grandfather was the worst version of himself, and it killed his son. But here's what I need you to understand." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "People are capable of both destruction and redemption. Your grandfather will never undo what he did, but he's trying every day to be better. That doesn't erase the past, but it writes a different future. Your father taught me that love is the only thing worth choosing. I think he'd want you to know that choosing love sometimes means giving people chances they don't deserve, because grace is the only thing powerful enough to break cycles of pain." She saved the video, adding it to the collection of truths she was building for her children's future understanding. In his own apartment, Robert sat looking at photographs of Daniel, young, full of promise, still believing his father could change. He thought about the grandchildren sleeping floors below, carrying Daniel's legacy in their blood and laughter. He couldn't bring their father back, couldn't return the years Hannah had suffered, couldn't undo the cruelty that had seemed so justified at the time, but he could show up tomorrow and the day after, hand every day until his last breath, trying to be worthy of the grace he'd been given, not earned, never earned, but received anyway by 3 children who didn't yet understand the full weight of what their existence meant. The hotel stood silent in the night, its walls holding decades of stories. But perhaps the most important one was just beginning. Not a story of perfect reconciliation or easy forgiveness, but of people learning to build something new from the wreckage of what should have been. A story of children who would grow up knowing both the cost of pride and the possibility of change. A story of love that survived death and grace that demanded daily renewal. Hannah Miller had walked into this building 2 years ago with nothing. Now she stood in a suite overlooking the city, her children safe, their future secure, their father's memory honored. She hadn't won through inheritance or legal battles or revenge. She'd won by refusing to let cruelty have the final word, by choosing to let her children write their own story with their grandfather, by insisting that dignity mattered more than money, and truth mattered more than comfort. Daniel Whitmore's name no longer existed only in whispered shame. It lived in scholarships and housing initiatives, and 3 remarkable children who would grow up knowing their father had been brave enough to choose love, and their mother had been strong enough to demand that choice be honored. And sometimes, on quiet mornings, if you listened carefully, you could hear the sound of a man learning to sing off-key with his grandson, trying to match the terrible but joyful noise Daniel had made. Proof that what love creates can never truly be destroyed, only transformed into something new. Thank you for staying with us through Hannah's journey. This story reminds us that healing isn't about erasing the past, but about choosing how we move forward despite it. If this resonated with you, please subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and continue bringing you stories that explore the complexity of human hearts. What matters most isn't where we start, but who we choose to become.